Good morning, how y'all doing? Good. I know it's a little chilly in here, so I can't fix it, but I just want to acknowledge it's chilly, so sorry if you're cold. My name is Precious Porras. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I currently serve as the Interim Director of the Office of Multicultural Affairs here at the University of Kansas. I've been asked to talk about strategic leadership at the Office of Multicultural Affairs within the University of Kansas. So that will be my discussion today. And really I'll be talking about my plans to cultivate equity through inclusive leadership. And if you like to tweet, follow me on Twitter or send me encouraging messages today like, you look really good in that dress, or I really enjoyed your presentation. So feel free to tweet at or follow. So a little bit about me. I am a product of TRIO. So I know there's some TRIO folks in here. TRIO works. If you're not familiar, TRIO programs for first-gen, low-income students, students with disabilities, to ensure that they're successful in getting to college, graduating from college. As a first-generation, low-income student of color, I knew that I was going to college, but I didn't know how I was going to get to college. And luckily for me, I had the intervention of Upward Bound. Upward Bound really changed my life. It gave me access to things that I didn't know existed. And I met a brother, a half-brother that I had through Upward Bound. I found my partner through Upward Bound. And I found my career through Upward Bound. The program gave me a woman who is still my mentor today, many years after graduation from high school, years I don't want to say. But it also taught me that I want to give back. I had folks who nurtured me and got me through. I also was in student support services, and another woman in that program, both phenomenal mentors that I talked to leading up to today. So, but they gave so much for me and to me, and my goal in life became, I'm going to pay it forward, and that's why I do this work that I do. That work translated in ways that I didn't know that it could. I started off saying I was going to go straight to undergrad, get a master's, get a PhD, no stopping in between. I was going to become this counselor, and I was going to work for Upward Bound. In college, when I went to get my master's degree, I discovered you can do student affairs. Like, that's a thing. Like, you can do that. And so I decided on this career in student affairs. I am a student affairs enthusiast. I actually call myself a student affairs nerd. I geek out at everything. Went to a conference with Marcia at ASH, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. Met Kristen Wren. Does anybody know who Kristen Wren is? Kristen Wren, so I identify as biracial. Kristen Wren writes about experiences of biracial, multiracial students as well as LGBTQ populations, but it was the first time I had ever read anything about biracial students, and I was like, oh my God, I feel so validated. This is in undergrad. So then I'm at this conference and I'm like, that's Kristen Wren. Like, I'm peeping her from the side, and Marcia and I sort of accidentally connected with her on purpose and had our fan moment, like, oh my God, you're Kristen Wren, we love you. And then she gave me a hug, and so it was really awesome. And so that's the student affairs piece. I love this field. I love the work that we get to do. And you can connect that to social justice. Really, this position as the director of the Office of Multicultural Affairs lets me combine the two. Social justice is how I live my life. It is a way of life for me. It's not a job. It's not a framework. It is a way in which I live my life. Discovered social justice working in multicultural affairs. Got to connect with some of the faculty from the Social Justice Training Institute, Jamie Washington, Kathy O'Bear, amazing people in the field, Becky Martinez, Vernon Wall. And I was like, what is this social justice thing? It was really intriguing. Got to go to Social Justice Training Institute, life transformed. I come back to campus and I'm like, we need to be doing this. This is the direction in which we need to move. And because I do student affairs work and because I consider myself an educator, I became a social justice educator. There are lots of ways to do the work. I choose to do the work in a way that pays it forward. I choose to do the work in a way that lets me share my knowledge with the rest of the community. I'm also a Jayhawk, so I have been at KU for 10 years. I've been in the University of Kansas, or in the Office of Multicultural Affairs for 10 years. I am a doc student in the School of Ed. I will be walking down the hill in 2016, so joining that less than 1% of women of color doctorates. I am a Jayhawk. It's an experience that I'm wrapped up in, and it's an experience that defines who I am. I remember when I had my first interview here, I left Strong Hall when Multicultural Affairs was in Strong Hall, and I'm on the phone with my partner, and I'm going, these students are amazing, this place is amazing. I'm like looking at Wesco with the background, you're sort of on the hill, right, at Strong, and this is where I want to be. And I was lucky enough to get the job and still be here all these years later. And also for fun, I'm an avid cruiser. Like, if you know me, you probably know that I cruise. Like, I love to cruise. This is me enjoying my balcony on a cruise ship. You can see I'm totally having a great time. And it's just a fun thing that I do, and I get other people involved. So if you know Cody, I got Cody to do this. Cody was sort of like, you just sit on the beach, do nothing? And I'm like, yes, and it's amazing. And he's like, I don't think so, but I'll go. And within 15 minutes, Cody was like, this is amazing. Why haven't I been doing this before? What's interesting about this, though, is I never vacationed growing up. I was very poor. We didn't vacation. If it wasn't for Upward Bound, I probably never would have left my state. So sometimes the dissonance around this, or checking myself on my privilege, like even now I hear myself saying like, this is me enjoying my balcony on a cruise ship. Like, that is interesting language to me as I think about myself as a social justice educator and checking my privilege on class and what it means moving from lower class, like bottom of the scale, lower class, to middle class now. And so even in the things that I love to do, I still use a social justice lens to think about it. This is one of my favorite quotes. 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones that you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sail, explore, dream, discover. And I really enjoy this quote because for me it's about letting go of fear, taking calculated risks to get to the place that you need to move. And that's exactly what I do in my social justice work. So if you will, I'll use explore, dream, discover to talk about my strategic plan. Again, I'm sorry if you don't like social justice. This is like woven in everything I'm going to talk about today. So, in thinking about exploring theory, I utilize social justice education theory, and everything that I do. It guides my life. It guides the way I do my work. So we have to have a conversation around, strategically, as we think about what the Office of Multicultural Affairs will look like, these concepts of social justice. So first, social justice is really about critical thinking. Yes, there are places that we want to be. It is a movement. It is a process and a goal. And it's really asking you, let's think critically about the social, political, legal, cultural aspects that create the patterns that we want to examine as to why we are at a place we are at. So we have to understand, and we have to educate ourselves and our students on, let's think critically about the problems that we're trying to solve. Additionally, social justice is a process and a goal, right? So it's not like something that we can go, well, we had the town hall forum and there are no more problems at KU, because we know it didn't work like that, right? Like, all of these things are happening as a result of the town hall. Those things were already happening. We just brought them to a much larger spotlight. It's going to take a long time to change the culture and climate at the University of Kansas to achieve the just environment that we want to get to. Social justice is a process and a goal that's mutually shaped to meet the needs of the individuals within that community. That also means everybody gets a say in what it looks like. So we're hearing every voice in the community as we work together to think critically and solve problems. Lastly, we have to talk about privilege, power, and oppression. You can't do social justice work and not discuss these concepts. Social justice is rooted in critically examining what are the problems, how did we get there, and those problems exist because we have a system that creates and favors some, the privileged group, over others, the oppressed group. If we don't talk about how privilege and power show up, how our own privilege and power shows up, so even me talking about my class privilege just showed up in this presentation, because it's not something that I check every day, right? Like, I can say, I have a house that I live in, I have a car to drive to work. Those aren't things that I think about every day. And with the privileges that we all hold, faculty, staff, and students, we don't always think about how they show up and impact our interactions with each other. So it's crucial that if we want to create change on campus, systemic, long-lasting, sustained change, that we really have the difficult conversation around privilege, power, and oppression, because that's going to get us to the root of what the actual problem is, and get us to this place. So I don't know how many of you have seen this. I call it the equality fence. So in this first slide, you can see this is sort of equality. There are differences between equality and equity. In equality, everybody has the exact same thing, right? So all three of these people have the same box to stand on. We've all given them the same thing, but they don't have the same access or opportunity, because this person, who would probably be me, can't see the baseball field at all, right? In equity, we give everybody the resources that they need to be successful. So everybody has different resources, but everybody has different resources and they all have the same opportunity. What we want to get to with liberation or justice is this place. And the first time I heard this, it sort of blew my mind, because I think about these boxes as the services we deliver to students, right? So our students of color, first-gen low-income students, they probably need this HawkLink box, right? They probably need this FYE box, because they need those experiences to ensure that they're successful and retained. This place gets us to the point where nobody needs boxes. So really, I'm trying to do away with a job for myself. If we do our jobs really well, we're not going to have any more work to do. This is a process and a goal, but it's a place that we want to get to where these services aren't even necessary anymore. First time with a clicker, sorry y'all. Additionally, want to examine student development theory. So we know that our retention numbers aren't at the place that we would like them to be. This isn't a unique problem to KU, but we know that ours are lower than we would prefer. And so if you study student development theory at all, lots of people talk about student development. Tinto happens to be someone that I spend more time reading about. Basically says, treat students well, they'll stay at the institution. I like Schlossberg's theory. Oh, and also NESE, the National Study for Student Engagement, has some benchmarks like engaging with faculty, having strong academic environments, things that we know that are like best practices. These are things we can do, our students will be retained. Ultimately, for me, and the theory that I operate most from in my student affairs lens, is Schlossberg's theory of marginality and mattering. Basically, you matter, period. That's end of story. She wrote a lot more about it, and I don't want to undermine the work that she did, because that's important work. It's hard to write academically, y'all. I can't. It's so tough. She wrote a lot more about it. But simplistically, you matter, period. And this is why our students, this is why there's a movement of Black Lives Matter. This is why there's a movement of Trans Lives Matter. This is what we need to be doing. As higher education professionals, we have a responsibility to ensure that our students feel like they matter. She says, if we do this well, students will be retained. It's not as simple as doing that, right? Like, it's not like I went to Jerry and was like, Jerry, you matter. That probably does validate Jerry a little bit, Dr. Crawford, sorry. But that was like a one-time thing, and I can't say it just one time. I have to invest time with Jerry to ensure that his ideals are heard, his problems are heard, and he feels like he matters at this campus, that he's important on this campus, and that his contributions are important. We have to do this, and this is the lens that I operate from. I feel like this is the lens that the office already operates from. This is why students feel like the OMA is a safe space, because we have the chance, and we spend the time, and we sit with students, and we hear their stories every day, and we say, you are seen, you are valued, you are loved, you matter, period. Really, I'm gonna get it. So we also need to discover and what are the critical conversations that are happening in higher education? What are the critical conversations that are happening within the conversation around inclusion and multiculturalism and social justice within higher education? What do we need to be talking about? What do we need to be saying? So we know right now the heightened awareness is on race on campus. that is the critical conversation that if you aren't having this conversation with someone, you should definitely come to the OMA and have a conversation with me. This is impacting our campus in a major way. This is impacting every campus in a major way right now. This is not and it's not a new concept either, right? Like, the OMA exists because of racial strife that happened at the University of Kansas in the 60s. The Multicultural Resource Center, the first one, exists because of racial strife that happened on campus in the 90s. The brand new center exists because students continued the conversation around critical conversations that they wanted to have and in ways that impacted their life. So we have to be having these conversations. We need to be talking about changing demographics. Love student affairs, phenomenal field. Most of our research is based on, any grad student in here want to help me out? White students. And in particular, white male students, cisgendered white students, able-bodied white male students. Most of the research that we base our best practices on, based on that demographic. Demographics are changing. We need to be talking about our trans students. We need to be talking about our students with intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, mental disabilities. We need to be talking about the browning of America, right? By 2020, Hispanics will be the largest minority minoritized group within the United States. If we aren't talking about this, and especially in the state of Kansas, we know that our Latino population is growing. If we're not talking about this and preparing for this, we're going to be caught off guard. Let's be proactive. Let's have this conversation now. With the changing demographics and the students who are showing up on our campus, social inequities exist. These are conversations that we're having, but we need to continue to have already, right? So what's happening with trans students who don't have access to all gender restrooms? What's happening with, on this hilly campus, students with disabilities who don't know about the accessible route, or when the elevator is broken and strong? What's happening with our women of color on campus who feel very silenced in the conversation around sexual assault? What's happening with lots of people who feel silenced in the conversation around sexual assault? These are conversations that are happening. Social inequities exist because we are a society. So it's not enough to say, well, we're not responsible, I'm not responsible. The problem exists, and so everybody has a responsibility to respond to it in some way. And if we're not having these conversations about how do we think about these things, what are the topics we should be thinking about or talking about or engaging in, we do a disservice to our students. Additionally, political and legal threats exist. I don't know how many of you read, I think it was a Kansas legislator that talked about diversity and mandatory diversity training for students. I disagree with his opinion that it's liberal rhetoric, because I think if he had come to diversity training, he would know it's about critical thought. It's about examining questions, asking why these things exist. But in a political climate, that can dramatically affect, those folks, they control our funding. They control policy. They could create a policy that says you can't have mandated diversity training, and that would greatly impact the University of Kansas. It would greatly impact the Office of Multicultural Affairs. We live in the state of Kansas with a governor who has lots of different opinions. If you agree with them or not, there's still opinions that impact our community, and particularly our funding. As we think about things that are happening with students and freedom of speech, those are huge conversations, right? So how does freedom of speech look on a campus with a strong student strong student code of conduct? That makes sense? Yes. What does it look like in terms of being able to adjudicate those cases? These are things that impact us in very strong ways, because we've heard our students say, well, why wasn't that person penalized for what they did? Maybe they were, but we can't talk about it. Or maybe freedom of speech says they can say whatever they want on campus. Certainly they're not free from consequence, but we have to consider freedom of speech and how it shows up in these conversations. And lastly, if all of those weren't enough to be like, yes, let's have these conversations, there's a business case for inclusion. As we look at Students who flee from the institution, students who drop out, students who aren't retained, on average, we're looking at the number of 800 per freshman year. That's a total of, I believe the number is $24 million over the course of 4 years that we lose. I think it's like $7,500 per student that we lose as an institution. I know $24 million is a lot of money. The institution knows $24 million is a lot of money. So we want to ensure, at a minimum also, if we want to continue to operate and be successful, we need to retain those students because they also offer us, beyond just cultural climate and importance and mattering for the student, they also offer us financial support. So what is my dream? What is my vision for the office? These are things that OMA already does and does well, in my opinion. And these are things that will be consistent themes should I be hired as a director. And these are things that I would hope will be consistent themes even if I'm not hired. So currently, we maintain safer spaces for students. And I say safer because we cannot guarantee safety for any student who enters our space, but we can maintain an affirming space for students. And I know that a lot of you are hearing from students, the OMA is a safe place. I like the OMA. I feel affirmed at the OMA. Moving on this, how can we transfer that same sort of feeling that students have in our space to other spaces? And they do have it in other spaces, but right now our voice is amplified because this is what we're charged to do and we do it well. We want to continue to uplift the voices and needs of all of our partners, but in particular, the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity and the Sexuality and Gender Diversity Center. Those are partners who are doing work very similar to what we're doing. We want to ensure that we're collaborating with those units and continuing to uplift their voices. Sometimes the focus is completely on OMA. We're a big office. We have 7 staff. The Women's Center has 2 and SGD has 1, right? Excluding graduate students. And so sometimes we're just more visible, but we know that the work that those units are doing is no less important. Sustain social justice education programs and services that support campus and community engagement. This is work that we find crucial. This is our priority. We want to ensure that we are engaging everybody on campus. We are student-centered. We are built by students for students. Our goal is to ensure that students on campus are successful and get to graduation. And we know that as a student affairs unit, we touch the social integration of student life, right? But the academic integration is important too. So we need to work with our faculty to ensure that they're creating inclusive classroom spaces as well as inclusive curriculum. Deliver quality student-centered academic services and programs for our HawkLink students. We know, looking at data, that our HawkLink students are retained at higher rates than their peers who are not in HawkLink. We know that what we're doing is successful. We need to continue that and, if possible, expand that program. That's a question of funding, but it's something that right now we're doing well, and it's something that we can continue to do, and it's something that we do in partnership with lots of units on campus. So we need to have that continued coalition with student affairs, enrollment management, and undergraduate studies. Retention is everybody's issue, not just the OMA's. Retention of students of color and marginalized populations is the job of everybody on campus, not just the OMA. So we're already working with these populations, these units. How can we ensure that we continue that coalition? Develop and strengthen alliances with Lawrence community partners. Student life on campus happens, but our students also go off campus. How do we ensure that the experiences they're having off campus are also hopefully engaging and positive? Really, I'm gonna get it. So I have a strategic plan that's I set out for 5 years. So for the spring semester and the summer of 2016, I think that it's crucial that the office respond to the Rock Chalk Invisible Hawk demands. This means we want to sit down with this group of students, because we actually haven't done this formally with that group yet. Sit down with this group, talk about what their demands are, talk about how those demands can align with the plan that comes out of the provost office. But we want these students to feel heard and valued, and so we hear these students every day because we know these students, but what is their plan? How can we help them move forward with that plan and navigate some of the red tape of the institution? You know that we're going through a campus climate survey. Rankin and Associates will be on campus in February doing focus groups. If we could have access to that information that comes out of that focus group, which would be largely qualitative data, how can we use that to guide our programs moving forward? And so my goal is that hopefully Saida will let me have some of that information so that we can craft additional programming for our students. We're facing budget cuts. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There will be a cut this year. There will be a cut next year. How can we ensure that OMA's budget is secure and allows us to do the things that we're doing and allows us to continue to grow? Additionally, we do have a required campus fee, and so we want to ensure that we maintain a positive relationship with Student Senate to make sure that that fee continues. I think that it is crucial that all staff participate in professional development, but in particular, I want to ensure that my staff has access to development funds and self-care. It's really important. This work is difficult, and so we want to ensure that the folks who are doing the work can step away from the place they are doing that work and sort of have that removed and engage with other people who are doing the work to discuss best practices, to discuss how to move forward, and just be able to talk with other people who understand what you're doing. We also are currently in conversation to create a cultural competency coordinator. This person would work with students, but focus on academic units to understand what the students' academic experience is and help the academic units explore how they can be more culturally competent. 1 to 2 years, looking at the development of an OMA strategic plan. So since I've been here, to my knowledge, the Office of Multicultural Affairs hasn't had a strategic plan. How can we know where we're going if we don't have a map? So I think it's crucial that we create a map. We will do evaluation and assessment of OMA programs. We evaluate a lot. Student Affairs loves to do evaluation. We love to measure. We love to where are we at? Let's check in. We don't always do anything with that, so we want to ensure that we are doing quality measurement and assessment of our programs. I want to increase the visibility and branding of OMA. Even though we know that we're important and all of you are here today, we did a study with journalism class. They did a study of 500 students across campus. Many of those students didn't know what the OMA was, where we were, or the services that we offered. That was surprising and not surprising, but we know that we need to get a reach beyond what we would term the choir or the students who come into our office because they know about us. Continued faculty and staff education, training faculty and staff. Social justice work is hard. You have to do your own individual work. So in doing this, we would really be looking at how can we help people individually do their work, explore their identities, understand how their privilege shows up, because that impacts the student experience. Collaborating with the Center for Teaching and Excellence and Curriculum Review, CTE already has a curriculum review committee that looks at how they integrate inclusion within the curriculum. And so this is an area where we could be having conversation with them, maybe even learning from them. I know for me, I'm not a faculty member, so I don't know what best practices in teaching look like, but it's a conversation that's worth visiting. And we need to have an enhanced relationship with Haskell Indian Nations University. Often their experiences are silenced. They're in this town. We share this university town with another institution, and sadly a lot of people don't know that Haskell is here. So how can we, as an office, and we have as a university an MOU with Haskell, but how can we ensure that our Haskell students, are also visible within Lawrence? Really, I'm gonna get that. Lastly, looking a few more years out, I think it's crucial as we face budget cuts and have these conversations about diminishing funds that we go to our alumni and we create a development fund. Our fees are often restricted. It would be great to do more with unrestricted fees. It would be great to be a little less worried about how are we going to fund this program or this position moving forward. And we know we can do that if we have the creation of an OMA development fund. HawkLink currently serves first-year students only. HawkLink is an academic-based retention program for any first-year student who might have trouble acclimating to the University of Kansas with a focus on first-gen, low-income, and/or students of color. Those students have a lot of support during first year. And then second year, it doesn't die off, because once you're OMA family, you're OMA family, and we try to maintain those connections with our students. And we know if we don't see them every day, like if they're not forced to be in our space, they're not going to come to us. So if we can continue the HawkLink program for a second year, we can have access to those students, have the continued conversations, because we know they don't get it still after the first year. Like, university is difficult to navigate. That's not unique to KU. Students get confused. We want to have continued and consistent access to those students, and hopefully by third year, they're integrated into their academic unit. Beyond that, with the creation of the development fund, being able to increase the OMA staff to support additional programming and academic needs, it would be great to have 10 retention specialists, right, to address the needs of those 800 students who are dropping out. That's not feasible right now, but hopefully that's a place we can get to. And the university has a goal to reach 90% persistence and 70% retention and graduation by 2022. The OMA needs to be included in this. This is work that we do. It's everybody's job, but what will our role in this be? So I encourage you to explore, dream, and discover with me, and with that, I am open to questions.
Give you a minute to take a breath and everything. Thank you all again for being here. Just giving her a chance to catch her breath here. But again, I want to hear everybody's thoughts by Monday, 8 a.m. Did I have some more committee members show up since the beginning of this? Stand up, please. There's another face. If you just see him walking down Jayhawk Boulevard or something, say, hey, I want to tell you this. I want the committee to know that. Because we want to know that. Oh, the other one, stand back up. Yeah, stand back up. Here we go. Stand back up. Everybody there. Here we go, Jack. Again, let us know. Okay? We want to hear your thoughts. So now we're going to open up the floor for any questions.
Yes.
Hi, Precious. Great presentation. Really loved what you had to say. This question has been asked of other candidates this week, and I just wanted to know if you could talk about the difference between social justice and diversity.
Absolutely. And so, in the way that I think about them, diversity is simply the presence of difference. Institutionally, that often refers to race, but the presence of difference is in the room right now, right? So we're all different genders, we're all wearing like different color clothes, we have different color hair. It's the presence of difference. On a spectrum, diversity, then multiculturalism, so multi being many, culture being a set of customs or values that guide how you live within the community. So being a Jayhawk is a culture, like if I do this, anyone, what am I doing? Waving the wheat, right? So as a Jayhawk, we indoctrinate people on traditions night. But many cultures have traditions and values, right? So multiculturalism is sort of how you make that difference work. Cultural competence also, how you make that difference work. Social justice being taking a step back, looking at what are the inequities that exist, what are the issues of power, privilege, and oppression, how do they show up, understanding that the problems are systematic, connected to a larger system, connected to often legal policy, laws, rules, that we can't just simply undo, right? So social justice, process, and a goal, we have to consider how our privilege shows up. We have to consider what oppression looks like for our students on campus, but it's much different because it's really focused on creating change. It's action plus change. So you have to be action oriented if you're doing social justice work, and you have to be working towards change. Hi, Sony. Thank you, Sony.
I work with a lot of students who don't think that the OMA is a place for them because they're white and they're from Johnson County. That's them saying that. Mm-hmm. What would your response be?
So I always like to say whenever I'm at an info table, Office of Multicultural Affairs is for every single student on campus. You pay a fee if you pay student fees. You literally pay a fee for the building. It is yours. Come, use it, sit in it, use it however you like. But I also understand oftentimes white students don't feel like they're multicultural, so a building with a name like multicultural on it seems like a space that's not for them. And this actually came up in the study that the journalism class did for us. Our response is, this is a space for you. You are multicultural. This is, social justice is a system, so you have a place within the system, and how you show up is also part of the solution, problem and or solution. So this is a space for you. If you feel uncomfortable at first, come in, have open lunch. I don't know if y'all know, OMA does open lunch every single day, 12 to noon. You have to bring your own food. But you sit with the staff and or students who are already in the space and learn more. Have informal conversations, have silly conversations. We talk about zombies a lot more than I would like to. But it's a space where any student can come and hang out. And so it's not as simple like one word I can say. It is a space for every single student on campus, but I would really need to spend time with that student having a discussion about, well, tell me more, say a little more about why you feel that way, and let's explore how you can feel comfortable coming into the space. Yeah.
Hi. You kind of mentioned your goals for the Hot Pink program, like having a second-year transition program. What features do you think would be beneficial for that?
In the second year program? So I think in the second year, by the end of first year, we hope that students have developed strong academic skill. We know that's not always the case. So continuing to ensure that they have strong academic skills, letting them explore conversations on what does it look like if I want to go to graduate school? Excuse me, what does it look like if I want to do research? Historically, marginalized students, in particular first generation students, or I'll speak from my experience, I didn't know that there were things you could do. Like I was like, I'm going to be a counselor because I knew you could be like a lawyer or a doctor or a counselor, and those were jobs, right? Like I didn't know you could study women, gender, and sexuality studies. I didn't know philosophy was like a class you could take. And so I think ensuring students have access to a lot of information, in particular looking at our identity-based majors, because we know that students aren't always electing into those, building up their academic skill, preparing them to transition to their third year. So we love you, and we can't hold your hand for 4 years. So not that we're holding students' hands, but we also need to send you to some other places to get growth and development, career development, career exploration, building academic skill, and ensuring that they're prepared to finish their last 2 years with a focus on access to financial aid. Research shows that after year 2, sometimes students have their aid starts to decline. Their scholarships don't renew, and by year 4, they don't have money to finish year 4. So a continued focus on how do we ensure that you also have access to financial need to stay here until you graduate. So any questions? Yes.
In addition to helping, has the research shown any other best practices that would help with the issue of retention?
Yes, and so I think when you are thinking about best practices for retention, you also need to keep in mind that those are a guideline, not a rule. They don't always work at your institution because your institution is unique. But things that I think are crucial are looking at climate, because we know, in particular for marginalized populations, climate has a lot to do with how students feel valued and whether or not they stay. It's crucial that we look at the classes that are gateway courses that keep students from staying on track, in particular math and sciences. And we know that it's important that students have connection to faculty. There's new research in Thriving that looks at actually different populations and how they need to be connected to faculty members. But we know that faculty is crucial in student retention, and we know this from the Thriving research. We know this from almost all of the retention research, and we know this from the NESE benchmark practices. And so access to faculty and mentoring relationships with faculty are also crucial. So those are 3 that I would name as best practices. And then Key. Hi, Key.
There's an obvious lack of white men in this room. Those of you who showed up, thank you. It's nice to have allies across campus, but we know that sometimes you mentioned a couple of legislators that says fairly ignorant things. Do you have any ideas for how to better reach out to this group and bring them on board, get them to understand that these issues actually exist in KU?
You said white men, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And so we know that the choir is important, and the choir needs practice. And the choir are the people who can go out and have influence. So I would say that if you are a choir member, and by choir member I say you already value these things, you already care about social justice, you care about diversity and inclusion, these are conversations you're having, you're ready to educate yourself, you're learning more, you're teaching yourself, you're not relying on other marginalized populations to teach you, but you're part of the choir, right? And so if you're part of the choir, you probably have a privileged identity. Most folks have a privileged identity. Not everyone, most folks. Use that privilege to educate your peers. So I, as a heterosexual individual, use my heterosexual privilege to educate other folks on issues in LGBT communities. Because I know that my voice can sound different to my peers. Other peers who are like, well, I don't know why, or I don't know how, or I don't know what. I provide an opportunity to share my privilege so that they don't have to feel silly asking questions or worrying about offending someone, right? So my advice would be, if you are already someone who cares about this work, call on your people, call them in, talk with them. The conversation is important because people matter, period. And so sometimes it takes people a little bit longer to get there. Don't give up. And also sometimes it's important to realize as much as you want to, you're not going to reach some populations. Angela?
Sorry, does somebody else use
No,
Nope, it's you.
please.
Okay. So the programming that the OMA does, especially on the part of undergraduates, I think is really great. I'm in the English department. We do something called Sneak Peek, and you all have been very supportive of that program. Could you talk a little bit as far as your strategic plan for the next several years is being shaped about how you will reach graduate students in that strategic plan that are minority students or occupy marginalized identities?
Absolutely. I don't know if it's a graduate experience, but it is lonely being a graduate student. I don't know, other folks in here have similar, okay, right? Like it's lonely and scary. And so I think one, it's building community amongst your cohort, if you feel comfortable with your cohort, connecting with other graduate students, but also knowing that women, people of color, LGBT populations sometimes feel additionally marginalized with those communities and feel silenced because it's tough enough to be a graduate student without also having this identity that doesn't show up in the research that you're doing, doesn't show up in the conversations in the classroom. School of Ed hired a multiracial professor of practice, and y'all, I can't even, it's a little almost obsessing how much I like, Dr. Harris, let's talk. And so, but I feel so validated having someone who does research on my identity and can have similar conversations with me. So as the OMA, we know that this is crucial. I know that this is crucial. We work really informally with graduate students of color. And I think that group has been really empowered to do some things, but we know that there are other things we can be doing. We can be assisting with Sneak Peek, ensuring Sneak Peek is making its way to other departments. We can be creating forums to talk about what is your experience like. We can be creating mentoring partnerships. Again, we know that our faculty are often called on to do this work that majority faculty aren't called on to do, but it's a lonely process, and if you've been through it and you can connect with someone. So as we look forward to the next 5 years, development of a mentorship program, development of programs and services for graduate students to come together and talk about their experiences. Marcia and I are in a writing group. We talk a lot more than we write because the talking is so crucial. And so creating space to have conversation to get through the process are a few ideas that I have. Hi.
Sorry for being late. I had a discussion section, so you may have already,
Class is important.
answered this question. But I'm sort of in the STEM field. I'm a psychology major, so soft science. But I have a lot of friends who are in the much harder sciences, like engineering. And I'm a member of OSTEM, an LGBT group for STEM majors. And I know there's a lot of, not necessarily pushback, but institutional barriers within STEM fields for not only LGBT but people of color. Are there programs that are in existence, or can you think of a program that you'd like to create to try and reduce some of those barriers?
Well, there's an amazing new program coming to campus. If you're eligible, Student Support Services has a brand new STEM grant for students who are eligible to be in TRIO that focuses on students who want to pursue careers in STEM. I'm pointing at Dr. Mikado Williams because she could probably speak to it more than I could, so perhaps the two of you can connect and talk about if you're eligible or what that program will look like. STEM is actually a really big conversation in higher education, and so how it shows up on campus is interesting, and I think Dr. Estella's in here as well, and I know that with IMSD there are some programs that are happening, and so there are programs in place currently, and we can definitely look at how we can expand those programs or what those programs look like, but I think the bigger conversation is why aren't they more visible? How can we ensure that the programs that we have are visible to students? How can we ensure that students know what STEM is? Often marginalized students think, oh, I can't do science. Like I just had a student in my office this week who was, he was like, well, I didn't do really good in my computer engineering class, so I didn't think that was a career for me. Found another outlet to do computer engineering, not my thing. Found another outlet to use those skills and has really blossomed since then and is now planning to go to graduate school. And so how can we connect and have conversations with students to explore STEM is something that you can do, STEM is a thing, and this is what it looks like.
All right, we have time for one more. Thank you.
Quiz?
Yes.
Precious, very good presentation.
Thanks, Quiz.
Being here this morning. Talking about cultural competency training, potentially with student organization officers and advisors. Want to know your thoughts on mandatory as compared to not, as compared to even a much bigger scale than these student groups. 600 groups on campus. I still got 50 to 100 groups that haven't even re-registered this year, let alone try to put another layer of something mandatory on, but obviously knowing the importance of it. Just want to know your thoughts on what you think that could look like.
So first I'll speak to our office is pleased to do competence training with students and student organizations. We always want to push them a little bit more and say, let's also talk about social justice, but we know meeting students where they're at, and sometimes they just need to have the presence of there's difference on campus. And this is how you make that difference work within your organization. Sometimes the competence conversation is where they need to be, but again, pushing them for the social justice conversation, because your privilege shows up in the way you lead your organization. And so it's crucial that as student organizations have conversations about those identities that they have, how they show up, because that impacts if you bring in other people to your group, or it impacts the dynamic of your group. The mandatory question is a little bit harder. I'm not a big fan of mandatory education because I think there are a lot of people who are already resistant to the conversation, and then forcing them to go, they sit there and they don't participate and they don't engage and it doesn't stick for them. And sometimes when you force people to do it and they have to engage, something does stick. Not a big fan of it, but I can be convinced that it is an important conversation, and sometimes if you connect it to funding, groups will go and have a conversation they weren't willing to have, but they learned something from it. It sparked the tiniest thing, and that tiny little spark can really grow. So not a fan of mandatory education, not opposed to it being tied to funding.
I want to thank you again, Ms. Porras, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all.